Whenever there is a person striving towards a goal, whatever the goal is, there is always an opposition, an enemy, which must be overcome. This is just the universal drama that we're in. The drama that there's always going to be something standing between us and whatever we define as our ultimate destination. And just like with any battle, the very first step is to understand the enemy. And I believe that with most battles, even though it doesn't seem like it, the main enemy is actually the ones that are not external to us, but the enemy that is within. As Steven Pressfield writes, resistance is not a peripheral opponent. Resistance arises from within. It is self-generated and self-perpetuated. Resistance is the enemy within. So just like how a video game has many different levels and maps, and each level comes with its own set of challenges and a monster to defeat, then so too does our inner world hold the same landscape, just like a video game. And the equivalent version of the video game monsters, which is within us, is what we'll call shadow entities in this video. Now, where did these shadow entities come from? Most likely these shadow entities would have come from childhood, and this is where the idea of where childhood trauma comes from. And this is why in some therapeutic practices that one of the primary goals is to uncover and understand what unresolved traumas you're holding within, which is holding you back in life. And these shadow entities are an inescapable part of us, the yin to our yang, and it is always trying to break to the surface to seek outward expression. And the longer that you live life ignoring these shadow entities, by repressing this side of yourself, of distracting yourself from your inner traumas or your inner turmoils, then the denser and the blacker and the larger the shadow entity becomes. And if it's left unattended for long enough, then it may manifest itself in your life in the form of a crisis or a breakdown. And that's what led Jordan Peterson to say something along the lines of, if you want to fight a monster, then it's best you choose a time and a place to fight it, otherwise it'll catch you when you're unaware. There are shadow entities which you have to confront and you have to deal with before you're able to actually move forward and level up in life. And while there are many different shadow entities which lurk in our subconscious, for this video I'm just going to focus on the two main ones, which most of us have. And number one is the shadow entity which is birthed from our fear of failure. And when I was doing some research on this topic, some of the main root causes for the fear of failure is maybe your parents scolding you for failing in school, or maybe it can even be your classmates making fun of you when you tried something new. And while these are all very valid points, what I really think is that the deepest root of this trauma is that as kids, we weren't conditioned to embrace failure. We weren't told that it was a normal part of life. This wasn't taught in school, this wasn't taught by our parents, and so we run away from failure. As Robert Kiyosaki says, in school we learn that mistakes are bad, and we are punished for making them. Yet, if you look at the way humans are designed to learn, we learn by making mistakes. We learn to walk by falling down. If we never fell down, we would never walk. And I can really relate to this. So when I look back in school, whenever I would get my math exam back, I would always look at all the answers which I got right, but I would never look at the answers which I got wrong. I would never try to learn from my mistakes because it was too painful. It's too painful to look at where I went wrong. And since I never addressed this behavioral pattern for many years in my life, I didn't realize that I subconsciously feared failure in many different aspects of my life as well. For example, I wanted to make this YouTube channel over 3.5 years ago, and the main reason why I didn't was because of fear of failure. It's as Carl Jung says, if you do not make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you'll call it fate. And it's so scary to think about the gravity of that quote, that we can act unconsciously and call it fate. Because, for example, every time I thought about the possibility of me making a YouTube channel, I would unconsciously, out of fear, I would end up procrastinating and doing something else, watching TV or cleaning my room, even doing actions which I told myself were productive. And what ended up happening is that since I didn't address this fear of failure that I had with YouTube, then 3.5 years went by of me acting unconsciously, always procrastinating and trying to drive out my dream vision out of my life, unconsciously out of fear. And like I said, this is a shadow entity which is always trying to seek outward expression. It is always trying to make itself known to you. And the cool thing is that once you take the time to understand it, once it no longer becomes unconscious because you're conscious of it, then it will no longer rule your life. So for instance, when I truly embraced and became conscious of the fear that I had of making a YouTube channel, then I was able to act in the face of fear. When I shot my first video and when I uploaded my first video, I still felt that same amount of fear, but instead I was able to act consciously in accordance with my higher self, instead of doing something else and acting unconsciously and procrastinating out of fear. And that's what it means to have mastered fear. Not that you don't feel fear at all, but you feel the fear and you do the action anyway, as Steven Pressfield writes. Each day, the professional understands he will wake up facing the same demons, the same resistance, the same self-sabotage. The difference is that now he will not yield to those temptations. He will have mastered them and he will continue to master them. Now, the second shadow entity that we must face is the feeling of unworthiness. Now, there are a variety of reasons why this can come about. So for instance, somebody who grew up in poverty, they may have the self-limiting beliefs that they don't deserve abundance, or if, for instance, somebody's been rejected by friend groups or love interests, they may feel like they're not worthy of love. And if I'm being open and honest, I've had this feeling of unworthiness in my life, which I've had to try to overcome. And a big part of this was basically the social media. And sometimes you see these posts and you realize that you weren't invited. So I'd never had this really close-knit group of friends, and that added to the feeling of unworthiness. And this feeling of unworthiness doesn't just impact me in my social relations, but it also impacts me in other areas of my life. The feeling of unworthiness actually carried over through my career. So when I was applying for the dream internships or the dream jobs that I really wanted to get, I feel like there was a sense of self-sabotage there, because subconsciously I didn't believe that I deserved what I was applying for. And the thing that sucks about this is that if you have the feeling of unworthiness, then you're giving yourself a self-imposed ceiling of what you can achieve and what you can experience in life. And I don't believe that's the way life should be lived. So the first step in overcoming this shadow entity, this demon in our head that's telling us that we're unworthy, is first to acknowledge it, to understand that it's there. And it's a very difficult thing to do. I felt ashamed of feeling unworthy, which is why I didn't want to acknowledge this part of myself. And the only way that you can overcome this is by journaling and introspection, and understanding that while this is a part of us, it does not define who we are. The acceptance of the shadow and the understanding of its presence is the prerequisite for us reaching our higher selves. As Carl Jung writes, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And I especially like the last part. Only by making the darkness conscious can we see the light and move forward in our lives and overcome the shadow. And a big part of what we've been talking about right now is the process of healing. If we are healing traumas from our childhood, then in a way we are healing the inner child. And there's this African proverb which goes, "The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth." And like we've said, the shadow entity is just a part of ourselves wanting to be acknowledged and understood, and ignoring it can lead to outward expression in the form of crisis in our lives. And religions have long understood this. That is why they came up with the concept of confession, a safe space where you can share the shadow aspects of yourself with a trusted professional, and they are able to guide you and help you navigate the darkest parts of your soul. And this is why tribes had shamans. They acted as spiritual guides for the members. Or if you aren't spiritual and religious in the modern day, they have therapy, where the psychologist helps you navigate the inner world. And there's one commonality amongst all of these things, and that is they require radical honesty on behalf of the patient. Honesty of facing the darker aspects of yourself which you have been avoiding. And what if you're not comfortable with sharing the darkest parts of yourself with a priest or a shaman or a psychologist? Can you still heal yourself? And the answer is yes, you can still do this in your own safe space and your own time. As we've mentioned, through the process of journaling and introspection. All it requires is for you to be truly open and honest with yourself. As the saying goes, this above all, to thine own self be true. And also the truth will set you free. And it's going to be a very difficult journey, both spiritually, psychologically, and even emotionally. But if you decide to embark on this journey, then just remember, nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less. Now, in every video game, you have to go through a series of other little obstacles and even traps before you're able to face the final boss. And when you embark on your journey to try to face the shadow, you're going to have to be aware of these traps. And the thing about these traps is that they sort of hold a similar characteristics to the shadow itself. And if you're not aware of them, if you're not conscious of them, then you'll unconsciously act them out. So the very first trap is psychological projection. It's a lot easier to see the faults of other people than to see the faults of our own, as Carl Jung writes. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. All the negative traits that we do not like about ourselves, we tend to project onto the other. For example, we see this in bullying. If a bully feels weak and insecure of himself, then he's going to find a subject to project this on, and he's going to bully the subject to make the subject feel weak and insecure. And what this does is that it protects the bully from facing what they feel internally, from facing the harsh truth that they themselves feel weak and insecure. Or it can even be when we judge somebody in our lives and we call them sloppy and lazy. When we do that, then there's actually a good chance that we are actually sloppy and lazy ourselves, but we do not want to admit it to ourselves. And the danger of psychological projection lies here. Our judgment towards others is a reflection of our inability towards accepting the darkest parts of ourselves. As Carl Jung writes, "What if I should discover that the poorest of the beggars and the most impudent of offenders are all within me, and that I stand in the need of the arms of my own kindness, that I, myself, am the enemy who must be loved? What then?" And there's also this other quote which goes, "Your perception of me is a reflection of you. My reaction to you is an awareness of me." And so what is the solution to this? As corny as it sounds, I found that the solution to this is love. To view the world lovingly, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Because if you're unable to understand and accept the faults of your neighbor, then how are you able to understand and accept the faults of yourself? So the answer is love. Love will set you free. We need to understand that our outer world is just a reflection of what we feel internally. As within, so without. Now, the second trap which we need to be aware of is actually our own human nature. So there's this term in biology called homeostasis. Homeostasis, from the Greek words same and steady, refers to any process that living things use to actively maintain fairly stable conditions necessary for survival. Our biology is built to have our body remain in a consistent and steady state, and in a similar way, so too are we like this psychologically. We do not like to push the boundaries of where we currently are. We like to stay in the known. But as we mentioned before, our shadow entities, the things that we must confront, lie in the subconscious. They lie in the unknown, away from our conscious awareness. And if we do not make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our life and we'll call it fate. So it's inevitable that we must go through the process of navigating through the unknown. But however, just how biologically our body perceives anything in the unknown or anything that will upset the balance as a threat, then so too does our mind perceive us exploring the subconscious, exploring the unknown as a threat. And so we're met with the phenomena of resistance. And resistance is like a force field. So when we're trying to take steps towards our shadow entity so that we can understand it, there's actually an invisible force which is trying to push us away from actually getting there. And it seems like such a paradox because earlier we said that the shadow entity is just something that wants to be known and understood. So why is there an invisible force trying to stop us from getting to it so we can understand, so that we can know and understand it? Seems weird, right? And I was actually stumped when I was thinking about this when writing the script, but I think it's actually the ego. I think the ego is afraid of us getting closer to the self, and that's the self with a capital S, the true self, our higher self, our inner self, because it's afraid that when we connect to the self and if we reach enlightenment, then there's going to be no more use for the ego. And I'm not trying to say that the ego is bad. The ego is actually a good thing. We actually need our ego. We need our egos to survive. But what we need to understand here is the polar relationship between the ego and the self. That there will always be tension between the two. And there will always be resistance when you're trying to go from the ego to your higher self. It is going to be a force trying to pull you back. And for years I didn't understand this force. So every time I may have been consciously trying to get closer to trying to understand myself and my own traumas, and then I would feel this massive force field of resistance making me feel very uncomfortable. Then I would be like, oh, then I would instead turn to Netflix or video games to avoid this confrontation because it felt extremely uncomfortable. But once you understand this phenomena, once you make it conscious, you can feel the resistance and you can do the things that you need to do anyway. Ultimately, I think that this whole journey of understanding our shadow entities, understanding the demons we have within us, is a journey that everybody should go on. And the thing about it is, it's not just for us, but it's for the world around us. And to explain this, there's this quote which goes, "If you don't heal what hurt you, you will bleed on people who didn't cut you." And this is exactly how trauma starts. It is passed from generation to generation. For example, the drunken father who passes down the behavior of alcoholism to his future generations. But the thing is, all the hurt and all the generational trauma, it can stop with you. You can be the reconciler of trauma in your bloodline. All that you heal within yourself, it's not only for you, but it's also for your bloodline and the generations to come. As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you liked it, can you please leave a thumbs up? It really goes a long way in helping this channel grow. And if you're interested in this topic about fears and traumas, then I definitely recommend you watch my video here. And as always, thanks again for watching. Really appreciate you all, and see you guys in the next video. Peace.